Why are you in Turkey right now, other than this conference?
Why am I in Turkey? Because the Bosporus is beautiful, and there's a lot of interesting people in Turkey who are doing cool startups. This is my third visit to Turkey. I came twice last year. Yeah, it seems like a very vibrant economy. It's still growing, but it's an interesting place.
You're in Social Wire. Do you have...
We have 2 investments in companies from Turkish founders in the US, Udemy and Social Wire. I think some of their teams are still here. And then we actually just made an investment last week in a company, Parlak Bir Gelecek, which is doing university placement and matching for students and universities. So.
Parlak Bir Gelecek.
Yeah, don't get me to try and do that twice. I probably won't be able to.
I think you did it really well. Parlak Bir Gelecek, and they're in education?
Education and sort of helping students and universities get matched together.
So you've spent a lot of time overseas. You are a world traveler. You probably get a lot of flack in the Valley for doing that. But I actually heard that, I heard a rumor that most of your exits from Fund 1 and Fund 2 will be international startups.
I don't know if most of them will be, but I think we're starting to see some bigger exits internationally. We had a nice win with a company that had a $200 million acquisition out of Singapore to a Japanese acquirer about last month. Yeah, I'm very optimistic about the growth and opportunities in international markets. It's still not as much historical data on exits and returns, but again, I think that's where most of the growth and opportunity is going to be coming from.
Why do you think a lot of Silicon Valley VCs ignore it, or at least don't make it as much of a hype thing?
Well, it is a pain in the ass to get on a plane. It is a pain in the ass to learn about other markets and speak other languages. And because you have a lot of success in Silicon Valley, I think it's very easy for people to just, sit around their own backyard and invest within a 30-mile radius of Sand Hill Road. That's not necessarily a bad strategy. A lot of people have been doing that successfully for several decades. But, I think for folks who are willing to work a little bit harder and get to know people in other geographies, there's plenty of opportunity that's going to be happening in the next decade.
So your latest fund, which you just raised, it has 25% committed. It's a $40 million fund.
Probably more than 25% committed, actually. But
10 million committed to international startups.
Why?
Why only 10 million if you're traveling so much and you're on a geeks on a plane and you're doing all this events?
Well, I think it's we're still trying to figure out how we do follow-on strategy in international markets. One of the biggest challenges is in the U.S. we can afford to be fairly conservative, and we typically let other investors lead at the Series Seed and Series A rounds. In international markets, it might require us to be more active in doing more of that ourselves. So even though we think there's a lot of opportunity in places like Brazil and India and the Middle East as well, there's less investors willing to jump in early, not at least at the same levels as in maybe Silicon Valley and New York. So we have to be a little bit more careful about where we decide to follow on. But we actually have seen success, particularly in Brazil now. Probably about a third of our companies have made it to Series A, and even a few have gotten to a Series B level.
What does a founder in this audience need to do to get your attention? What are the top three things they need to be to get your business card?
Ship a product, get a customer, make money. Those are the very basic things. I think for us, most of our investments come through our network. So other founders and mentors that are in 500, even though we don't maybe know Turkey and the Middle East quite as much, that's still probably more than a third, if not half of our investments come from people that we know and trust telling us that there's interesting companies.
What would you like to know about Turkey and the Middle East?
What I'd like to know about Turkey?
We're in Turkey.
No, I haven't spent as much time here as I would like, so I think understanding how the SaaS and small business community is using technology is probably an interesting area. Most of what I've been exposed to in Turkey so far has been consumer startups and gaming startups. It'd be interesting to see if there's similar opportunities on the SaaS and SMB side as well.
Which consumer startups and gaming startups are you looking at?
So I wouldn't say we know the territory extremely well, but we got to visit Yemek Sepeti and Peak Games last year. And we're probably coming back in about a month and a half with a group of folks on Geeks on a Plane to visit a few other companies.
So you've got 600 investments now, or 600 startups.
Approximately.
Are you going to change the name?
No. I mean, I think originally, it was funny, when we named it that, people thought that was crazy and we would never get there, and now, 3 years in, we're already there. That's not really the goal. I mean, obviously that's a strategy, but I think we still need to demonstrate success with that strategy. But it looks like it's working.
How is Little Bets different than Spray and Pray? Everyone asks you this.
It's not different than Spray, but we do think it's different than Pray. So there is a method to the madness that we go after. It is a high-volume strategy. That's absolutely true. We did about 190 investments last year. We'll probably do over 200 this next 12-month period. And again, it's really just a logical reaction to high fail rates and low cost of experimentation. In fact, I would argue that the traditional venture strategy of putting down $3 to $5 million on high fail rate companies is actually the questionable strategy.
So if traditional venture capital needs no defense and it's doing all right,
needs no defense? I think it needs a lot of defense, actually. You looked at asset class returns for venture capital over the last 10, 15 years?
I have.
They suck.
But if as some bloggers have said, it's worth keeping the status quo. Why are these traditional firms changing and adapting to what you guys are doing, to what Naval is doing?
I mean, I think there are a few that are changing and adapting. I think that Andreessen Horowitz at the large end, like I said, is spending quite a bit of capital in developing resources for corp dev and recruiting. I think First Round Capital has built quite a large amount of portfolio resources around education. Google Ventures has design and data scientists on staff. AngelList is building their own platforms. So I do think there's lots of companies that are doing interesting strategies, and there's probably several that are doing interesting strategies that aren't being transparent about it. Some of the larger companies in the Valley have been known historically to do very interesting programs that they run stealth.
Sequoia, namely.
I have no idea who you're talking about.
So do you think that this traditional VC model and this stealth initiative plan, do you think it'll outlast these trends as
Yes. Well, I mean, I think the stealth model is, sorry, I guess I should distinguish. One of the things that I think Sequoia was doing very smartly with the Sequoia Scouts program was they were doing a lot of little bets sort of strategy. They just weren't telling people that they were doing it.
Because when you tell people that you're doing it, people automatically shout Spray and Pray.
Or they might copy it. And so if there are people who are publicly sort of vilifying that strategy but silently practicing it, that might be a great strategy for investment.
How do you feel about that? So you come up with this sort of new, loudish way of bringing in startups, which is ultimately a good thing. I think the 500 startups community is a great thing for founders. As much as I've talked to founders, they really like being a part of your family. So you bring this in, people shout that it's not traditional, as all innovation is. And then they sort of adopt these policies, go hire marketing managers, bring on tons of staff. How does that make you feel? Are you pissed that that's going on?
Well, I mean, I think there's larger funds that have more capital to throw around who can, pursue different strategies. I think one of the things that a lot of venture capitalists have practiced over the years is, I think, a more strict and banker-oriented image, which kind of presumes a power structure where the investor is in control and the entrepreneur does not have leverage. More and more, really great entrepreneurs do have leverage. They have lots of information. They don't require lots of capital. They have multiple sources for that capital. And so I think you'll see the relationship change dramatically from one where investors have all the power and the entrepreneurs don't, to one where entrepreneurs have a lot of the power and the investors don't as much. And that's become a lot more true in Silicon Valley than it is internationally, but I think you'll see that happen over the next decade internationally as well. And as that shifts, I think you start to see that people who are investors have to work harder both to create value and to have a communication, style with the entrepreneur. So it's not about, wearing a suit and looking important and exercising leverage and control. It's about kind of relating to your customer in terms that they can understand and hopefully providing, some services of value in addition to capital that they appreciate.
So what's more likely to be around in 30 years, AngelList or Kleiner Perkins?
AngelList or what?
Kleiner Perkins? 30 years. It's a long
I
timeline.
love the guys at KP, but that's AngelList all the way, no question.
Ooh, it's going to make news.
Might be 10 years.
So you say 500 Startups is a platform, but you yourself are sort of a one-man show.
No, that's not true at all. We have over 30 people in the company. I'm a one-man mouthpiece, perhaps, but we have 10 people doing investing. We have 20 people doing marketing and distribution and PR and education and back office. So not at all a one-man show. In fact, I would again challenge most VCs have nowhere near the people to capital ratio that we do. We're much more aligned with our investors as a result of that as well. We're not getting fat on management fees. If we're going to make money, it's going to be because we get to carry and we make profits.
So what do you think the real value is in platform VC, beyond the check?
Well, I think the word platform is overused. There are certainly legitimate online services like AngelList, Dashboard, Mattermark, Funders Club, and others that are online services. But then I think there's also just an investment of time and resources in non-investing capital. So a traditional funding venture capital firm structure is mostly partners who invest money and other teams that support them. And I think you're seeing now that there's entirely different teams that do either education, recruiting, support, monetization, distribution. There's a whole other sets of services that are probably more like a consultancy model than a banker, investment capital, or PE shop. And I think you're going to see, dramatically different types of venture capital firms emerge that spend those resources in different areas.
So why go it alone? Why would an international founder just go on AngelList and start raising early stage there as opposed to talking to you or even talking to some of the larger early stage oriented VCs?
Well, I think for a lot of international founders, the ability and possibility of finding an investor from, maybe Silicon Valley, maybe somewhere else in Europe is very real. We found a company that was doing dairy web statistics for dairy farms called Farmeron that was out of Croatia on AngelList. Ended up being that they went through Seed Camp first, but I'm sure that we wouldn't have gotten to meet that company if we were just waiting to meet them in person someplace. There's all kinds of companies, I think, in Silicon Valley that have got investment resources out of New York. So just being able to have a placement service that doesn't require physical presence creates a lot more opportunity.
How did you find them? What are they tagging their profile with? International startup, Dave McClure?
I can't remember whether Naval flagged it directly for me or whether we just happened to find it, but it was one of the things that was kind of weird that you see a web stats company based on dairy farms and cattle. But there's lots of dairy farms all over the world. That's, tens of millions of heads of cattle, probably hundreds of millions of heads of cattle. So it's actually a very meaningful business. You talked about companies that solve real problems. So web stats for milk production for dairy farmers solves a real problem.
If you were starting out today and you had, you were a first-time entrepreneur, had no PayPal history, we're a farming startup from Croatia, what would you where would you raise your first round from? What would you do other than 500 startups, unless you really believe that 500 startups is the way to go?
There's lots of great sources of capital. I think the initial stage would be, on your savings or in your spare time, build a functional prototype. Probably the next stage would be to try and approach a local accelerator or incubator or a local angel investor to put a small amount of capital in so you could hire a few people or expand a marketing budget. And I would be, trying to grow some amount of revenue if that type of business provided that. I think eventually getting to seed capital and Series A capital is great, but probably the first 2 or 3 years of the company's life, they're going to have to find alternative sources for capital, and that's even more the case if you're not in Silicon Valley. But again, fortunately, the cost of building startups has come down quite a bit, and the availability of education and information is widely available, thanks to places like TechCrunch, too.
Thank you. And thank you for your time, Dave.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.
You were great. Thank you, Alexia.
Thank you, Arda.
You came all the way from San Francisco, from Rio, and it was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.